Man, Watkins Glen should just become like an annual Chase Elliott fan convention. I mean, if I was a Chase Elliott fan, I'd have my tickets booked for 2020 already. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric, and welcome to Out of the Groove. Lots to talk about after today's road course racing actions up in Watkins Glen, New York. A lot of playoff implications we have to discuss, a lot of on-track rivalries that kind of sprouted out of nowhere. Kyle Busch did not make any friends today. And then the two most recent Watkins Glen winners, Chase Elliott, Martin Truex Jr., basically had like a 90-lap battle for the win. Basically from start to finish, it was those two up near the front of the pack battling. The race ended with a 30-lap run that was really just the two of them back and forth trying to gain an edge on one another. We're going to talk about all this and more. We're now only about a month away from the start of the playoffs, so we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about point standings and implications and everything. But to start with, let's talk about the winner of this race. Let's talk about that long and very entertaining battle down the stretch between Chase Elliott and Martin Truex Jr. for the win. That was fun to watch. That was road course racing pretty much at its best. I mean, there was not a lot of passing. Chase Elliott led 80 out of the 90 laps today, so for a race that was dominated that heavily, I don't know, I still had a pretty good feeling watching it, because even though Elliott led so many laps, Martin Truex Jr. was always there to put the pressure on him, and you always had a sense that if Chase Elliott made any major mistake, Truex was going to be all over him and be able to take advantage. That's why on that final restart, with about 30 laps to go, you saw the two of them actually make contact twice before they even got on the back straightaway. That's because Martin Truex Jr. knew that it was going to be really hard to pass Chase Elliott. Those two had very equal race cars, you know, all race long. We saw Kyle Busch work his way through the field, we saw Truex work his way through the field, we saw plenty of people work their way through the field, passing guys left and right in the top 10, top 5. But those two drivers could not pass each other. They were about as evenly matched as I've seen two cars at Watkins Glen ever be. I will say the actual final lap was a little anticlimactic because Truex never really was able to get to Chase Elliott's bumper. He was really able to get, you know, he'd kind of rubber band. Sometimes he'd be 1 or 2 car lengths back, other times he'd be 4 or 5 car lengths back. He kind of would rubber band in that zone, but he could never quite put enough good laps together to get right to Chase Elliott's bumper. Even though it looked like Elliott's car seemed to get a little looser, the handling seemed to go away on the longer runs. So it was a little anticlimactic that we didn't actually see Truex really get a shot. Really, he never got a chance to take a swing at Elliott in the final run there. So that was a little anticlimactic, but watching NBC's broadcast of it, watching them compare the two on boards with Truex and with Elliott, it was still very entertaining to watch, especially if you're kind of like an old school or a purist racing fan, because that race felt very much like an IndyCar race or a Formula One race at road courses. There was some fuel strategy, pit strategy early on that made stage 1, stage 2 really interesting, and then stage 3 strategy kind of went out the window, and it was just, you know, the two best drivers from the last 2 years at this track dominated and put on a show for the fans. So it had a very old school feel about it. But anyway, let's look at the top 20 finishers from this race. Chase Elliott, I'll talk about him a little bit, gets his second win of the season. Chase Elliott had been in a rut before this race. I'm sure he had this one circled. You know, he's run really well here in his young career. He obviously won this race a year ago to get his first ever Cup Series win, so it has a good place in his heart. I'm sure he had this race circled, so it's great to see them perform at the level they expected to. If he'd come into Watkins Glen and had an issue, that would have been, the slump would have really hit rock bottom at that point. But this has to give that team some good momentum moving towards the playoffs. This is a team that I still think has a chance of making a very deep playoff run. They were consistent earlier this year, won at Talladega, now have a win here at Watkins Glen. It's their mile-and-a-half program. Their intermediates still where they're lacking a little bit, but I don't know, hopefully this one can kind of get some positive momentum going their way. Cool as always to see Chase Elliott working with his father and former NASCAR great Bill Elliott as one of his spotters. That's always cool to see. Family affair. Chase Elliott in his post-race interview said that, you know, he never expected New York to feel like home to him, but here he was. I think it's safe to say now that Watkins Glen is Chase Elliott's best track, and he's going to be a threat there for many years. If he's dominating races like this at age 23 or however old he is, gosh, Watkins Glen's going to be his playground for 20 more years. Other young guys like Larson or Blaney or DiBenedetto or Jones, who had good runs today for the most part, I'd hate to be them right now because they're going to have to go through Chase Elliott for pretty much their whole careers, and Watkins Glen might be a very tough trophy to get. Elliott swept all the stages today, dominated, max points, all that great stuff, so I'm sure Chase Elliott fans, that's what I said at the beginning, if you're a Chase Elliott fan, I'd have my ticket for 2020 already, you know, I'd be pulling that up right now, because it was another grandstand sellout this year, so you can't wait till the last minute if you want to go see Chase Elliott run well at Watkins Glen. Just fair warning. Talking about second place finisher Martin Truex Jr., another great performance. He was my pick this weekend. He won this race 2 years ago, ran a very close second to Chase Elliott last year. I thought he'd, you know, kind of, the pattern would go his way. But ultimately, no, he never quite had enough to get by the 9 car. He said afterwards that he felt like there was like a pocket of air that kept him from getting within 1 or 2 car lengths from Chase Elliott. I tend to believe there could have been something at play there. We haven't been to Watkins Glen with these huge rear spoilers yet, and we know that they definitely disrupt the air more so than recent iterations of race cars, so I can understand if aerodynamics dynamics, especially at a high-speed road course like Watkins Glen, came into play a little bit. We still saw plenty of passing, or at least the normal amount of passing we see at Watkins Glen throughout the field for most of the race, so I can't say it had a major impact, but he might have had a little bit of a point there. I just think the two cars were so equal, it was going to be really hard, no matter what package we were running, for either driver to really pull away and get a big advantage. But still, a strong performance for Truex, continuing to build some strong momentum. He's, in my opinion, I think he might be becoming the championship favorite. I know Kyle Busch, I feel like all year long, has been the obvious favorite, the way he started this year off with like 12 straight top 10s or something. And obviously, both he and Truex have a lot of wins. But Martin Truex Jr. with the consistency these days, I don't know. Martin Truex Jr. is looking really good. I think they might be peaking at the right time. Joe Gibbs Racing had a great day. Denny Hamlin finished a quiet third place finish. And actually, pretty much everybody third on down was pretty quiet with their finishes because the top two were like 10 seconds ahead of this race. Hamlin was never a threat. Eric Jones, none of these guys were ever threats to Chase Elliott, Martin Truex Jr. But still, very strong day for Denny Hamlin. Love that FedEx Cares paint scheme he had on it. Fourth place, Eric Jones. I'll talk about him a little bit here because that's another huge points day. 4 weeks in a row, 4 straight top 4 finishes for Eric Jones. That's a lot of 4s. Eric Jones not known for being a great road course racer, but he's had some pretty good finishes there the last couple of years. He had a mistake in qualifying. Got lucky, was still able to come back and finish 14th. But despite all of those possible setbacks on Saturday, he came out, got stage points in stage 1 and stage 2, and finished 4th. So he is continuing to vault up the point standings. A month ago, less than a month ago, Eric Jones was outside the top 16. We were talking about getting him out of that car. Christopher Bell coming in. Now with these 4 straight top 4s, Jones is 13th in points. We'll look at the standings in a second, and he's looking pretty good. He's probably going to make the playoffs now. Ryan Blaney managed to drive his way up to 5th in the final run of this race. He had an issue late with Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy was not happy about it. Going through the carousel, Blaney washed up a little bit, spun Jimmy Johnson out. Now, Jimmy Johnson, right on that playoff cut line, couldn't afford to have something go wrong like that. Jimmy Johnson, I'll be interested to see if that carries over any weeks. Jimmy Johnson's pretty a level-headed guy, so is Ryan Blaney, but I don't know, when all that is on the line the way it is for Jimmy right now, Blaney might have made a bad mistake in this race, but still a 5th place run, not bad at all. Carry the banner for Team Penske. Talk about carrying the banner. How about Matt DiBenedetto? He's the only driver for that team, and he had another great career-making performance today. 6th place, this comes after he had a top 5 at Sonoma, the other road course we've been to this year a couple months ago. So man, road course ringer Matt DiBenedetto has, I mean, it kind of doesn't really have a great ring to it because it's a lot of words, but still, it sounds good if you're Matt DiBenedetto, I guess. He's put together a few pretty good finishes over the last month and a half or so, I don't know, he's making a pretty strong case to keep that 95 car next year. Kevin Harvick, another quiet 7th place finish, not a whole lot to talk about there. Kyle Larson in 8th, solid day given that he's still kind of near that playoff bubble, but that's all he needs to do, just solid top 10s. Brad Keselowski said this weekend that he doesn't feel like Penske's road course program is where it needs to be, and as you can see, there are only 2 of their cars in the top 10, but still, solid performance for Brad Keselowski, but it seems like Team Penske has started to really fall behind Joe Gibbs Racing. I talked about it a little bit last week, that maybe they've slipped back a little bit. I think now I'm pretty confident in saying that Penske's not quite where they were compared to Joe Gibbs Racing earlier this year. Earlier this year, I thought it was kind of a dead tie, maybe a slight edge to JGR. Right now, I think Joe Gibbs Racing is definitely the top team in NASCAR, and Penske's a strong second. Kurt Busch, a solid 10th place finish. Kyle Busch finishing 11th there. Usually an 11th place finisher, Kyle Busch would not be very noteworthy at all, but we have to talk about Kyle Busch's day because he had a very kind of uncharacteristic day. It all started when on lap 2, he got loose underneath William Byron going into turn 1, spun out, managed to keep it off the wall, kept it off other cars. He actually stayed in the top 10, really didn't lose that many positions as a result of this. I was impressed, but it was an early mistake. A little while later in stage 1, though, going into the bus stop, he made contact with William Byron, sent Byron sliding through the grass. Byron did not like that, and under the very next caution, he then drove up behind and rear-ended Kyle Busch. Looked to me like Kyle Busch maybe brake-checked him as well, caused more damage, honestly, on Byron's car than it did Kyle Busch's, which, note on that, I wasn't listening to the radio, but I saw reports on Twitter that Chad Knaus came over Byron's radio and told him to go hit Kyle Busch under caution. Kind of a bonehead move there by Chad Knaus. I know heat of the moment, emotions are high, but I don't know, you'd think a veteran like Chad Knaus would know to keep a level head about him. You know, when he worked with Jimmy Johnson, Jimmy was smart enough to ignore Chad Knaus at some of these, high emotion times. William Byron, still a young driver in his second year, probably heard Chad Knaus say, go wreck the 18, and was like, shoot, I better do it. Chad knows what he's talking about, so I don't know, I felt like Chad Knaus maybe cost him there, but still, Kyle Busch had an eventful day, and that actually wasn't even the end of it. Later on, accidentally, it seemed, Kyle Busch spun Bubba Wallace out in the carousel, sent Bubba up into the tire barrier, pretty heavy damage on the 43. A short while later, Bubba came back out onto the track, racing Kyle Busch towards mid-pack, and going down the front stretch, Busch went to make a pass on Bubba. Bubba ran him down to the inside wall. They door slammed a couple times, and then eventually Bubba Wallace purposely spun Kyle Busch out heading into turn 1. Bubba was not having any of Kyle Busch's crap this afternoon. Kyle Busch's car was beaten and banged up, basically on all 4 fenders. He still came home in 11th place. That's because he's Kyle Busch and he's just really freaking good. But he had a very eventful day and did not make a lot of friends. I really didn't expect that. It was a very uncharacteristically Kyle Busch day. You know, he's a little bit of a hothead. Getting into it with somebody, that's pretty Kyle Busch-like, but usually it's when he's racing for the win. Racing for 15th place and getting into it with Bubba Wallace and William Byron? That's not Kyle Busch-like at all. Anyway, he'll be alright. 12th place for Eric Almirola, solid. Chris Buescher continues to impress this year. Another top 15, 13th for him. Bowman Stenhouse, solid days. And then really quick here, Michael McDowell actually ran pretty well early in this race. Qualified well, so 16th is not bad at all for him. Daniel Suarez had some issues. He got into it. I think he spun Hemrick. Can't remember exactly who it was. He and Hemrick, or maybe it was Tidal. I don't remember who it was now specifically. Got into it a little bit. Not sure exactly if it was Suarez's fault, but another mediocre points day at one of Suarez's seemingly better tracks. So his playoff hopes look bad right now. At the bottom there you see Jimmy Johnson and Clint Boyer. Now we'll look at the playoff grid in a second, but Jimmy Johnson, you know, he's mainly only back there because of the contact from Ryan Blaney that really ruined his day in the final stage there. Clint Boyer had some issues of his own. He had to make an extra pit stop during that final caution, so hurt his track position. 2 drivers that needed strong points days, and especially with Ryan Newman's struggles. He had a right front damage, forced him to pit a couple times under green. Then he had a penalty. With Newman having a bad day, Boyer and Johnson probably both saw this as a great opportunity to build their points cushion, or maybe in Johnson's case, get back into that top 16, and really finishing 19th and 20th is not them making the most of the situation. So they had a chance to make a big splash on the points today and really didn't do it. But with that being said, let's look at the current playoff standings after Watkins Glen. We got 4 races left. And as you can see right there on that bubble, Jimmy Johnson did manage to get back in the top 16 thanks to Newman's struggles. But it's currently a tie for that final spot. Johnson currently owns the tiebreaker, but I'm sure Jimmy was hoping for a little more comfortable cushion after Newman had his issues. See, there Suarez is still within striking distance, but recent performance does not suggest that he's going to have an easy time getting back into the top 16. Look up ahead a little bit further, William Byron, even though he had his run-ins with Kyle Busch, still has a solid cushion. Eric Jones now 54 points to the good. That's a huge cushion for him, given where he was a month ago. Larson's just kind of been average, but he's hanging in there in 14th. Clint Boyer, though, 12 points to the good. That has to feel at least okay, but you got to believe there's a little bit of a missed opportunity there, given that Jimmy Johnson didn't run very well, Newman didn't run very well, Suarez didn't run very well. I think Boyer was hoping he could maybe put that 20 or 30 points above the cushion, but it is what it is. It kind of looks like what I predicted a couple weeks ago. You know, I figured of all those guys that are on the playoff bubble, I figured Ryan Newman would be the one that was most likely to fade out of the top 16, just because that team, they've never been there before. That's new to them. The big question was whether or not Daniel Suarez or Jimmy Johnson would be the ones to take his position. Right now it looks like Jimmy's done a better job than Suarez, mainly because Suarez, they're running 20th every week. I don't know what's wrong. Jimmy Johnson's team making that crew chief change, shaking things up a little bit. Maybe that'll help him out here in this final month, this final push to the playoffs. But right now, Jimmy's got the upper hand over Suarez and Newman. We'll see how that goes with a few very different racetracks coming up. We got Michigan next week. All right, so we've talked about a lot of different things in this race. Tempers flaring, crazy restarts. I didn't mention it, but earlier in this race, Martin Truex Jr. made a 3-wide move down the backstretch where he actually put 2 of his tires on the infield grass, going into the bus stop, and he still passed 2 cars and made it stick there. He basically brought the pass in the grass into the 21st century. That was insane. So this race had a lot of great moments like that. Let's put this thing on the groovy gauge. Let's give this thing a rating. It's the second road course race of the year. We still have the Roval coming up here in just a couple months, so road course fans, it's not over yet. So this was a really confusing race to watch as a race fan, honestly. It was also a very quick race. This race from the drop of the green flag was only about 2 hours and 20 minutes long. That's crazy fast by NASCAR race standards. That's because we didn't have too many cautions, and the ones we did have was usually single car spins or wrecks. One guy put oil down, that put us under caution for a little while, but not a lot of crazy carnage. What made this race fun is that the spins we did see were always the result of hard, aggressive racing. I mean, on lap 2, Kyle Busch trying to dive for the 3rd place spot, spins himself out. That's just fun. Obviously not if you're a Kyle Busch fan, but for an average racing fan, watching guys battle inside the top 5 like that, that's fun. When people, drive too aggressively and pay the price for it, that's what makes NASCAR fun. When you try to skirt that edge as best you can, if you cross it, that's when bad things happen. That's why these guys are the best stock car drivers in the world, because they're able to skirt that edge for longer periods of time better than anyone else. Restarts like the one where Truex passed a bunch of guys in the grass, or that final restart where Truex and Elliott were side by side through the S's and making contact, that was some spectacular Watkins Glen racing. It reminded me why Watkins Glen has always been my favorite road course track, and in my opinion, it might be the perfect racetrack, honestly. It's fast, but still got 2 or 3 really good passing zones, and it proved again today why it's so much fun and why it's lived up to the hype the last few years. The drama between Kyle Busch and William Byron, or Kyle Busch and Bubba Wallace, the payback on track, was also fun to watch as well because, ultimately they didn't tear up too much equipment. It was kind of just guys settling things there right in the moment, the way they should, I think, rather than letting it fizzle and go into the week and go onto Twitter. So we had all those great things, very entertaining aspects in this race that were super fun to watch. But the confusing part is, we did really just see one guy dominate all day. Chase Elliott led 80 out of 90 laps, and the final 30 laps, or 40 or so minutes of this race, was us just watching the same two cars run single file. To a non-race fan just tuning in and watching that, I can't imagine it was that exciting. It didn't look like a whole lot was happening up front. It was still very tense because we knew Chase Elliott was just one mistake away from giving the win to Truex, or creating a more physical battle there. But ultimately that whole run went by and Truex never really got a chance to take a swing at Chase Elliott, so it felt kind of anticlimactic at the end there. The finish was still exciting. The race overall was still very interesting, very entertaining because of the points implications, because of the rivalries, because of the great battle and the dominating performance by the two up front. I will say this, it's not very often that I watch a NASCAR race and think, wow, that driver, just his skill alone, really impressed me today. Sometimes a driver will make a great move like on a restart and I'm like, oh, that was a great move right there. But for 90 laps today, 200 or 300 miles, however long this race was, Chase Elliott impressed me pretty much the entire time. Truex too. Truex, I would say as well, equally impressed me as much as Chase Elliott. Like, I walked away from that race thinking, dang, Chase Elliott, Martin Truex Jr., those guys, they might be underrated, honestly. People talk about best drivers in NASCAR. They say Kyle Busch, they say Logano, they say Larson sometimes still. I don't know, Truex and Chase Elliott probably both bumped up a spot on that list, in my opinion, after their performances today, because that was just consistency at its best. And I know consistency isn't always fun. People like unpredictability. People like surprises when it comes to racing, I guess, at least. But sometimes a race like this is a breath of fresh air, especially given some of the ridiculous wild restarts, wild finishes we've seen here the last few weeks. This is kind of a breath of fresh air. The two best cars that dominated all day got to settle it between themselves, and it was all really in the driver's hands, I felt like. So I don't know, it still was a very fun race and fun finish to watch. Okay, I've done a lot of talking. My final score for the Groovy Gauge for this race at Watkins Glen, I'm going to give it an 85%. Didn't get me out of my seat the way Bristol did earlier this year, or the way the All-Star race did, or even the way Kansas did at times, but it definitely had me on the edge of my seat. I didn't want to click away. I didn't want to turn it off at any point today, so it was still a very, very good race, another well above average Watkins Glen race, but that's just my opinion. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments. Did you enjoy this race? Did you not enjoy it? What did or didn't you like about it? I'd be curious to know down in the comments, or on Twitter. You guys can follow me over there as well. That's my smooth little transition to my outro, guys. Thank you so much for watching this episode. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, continue the conversation over there. I appreciate it. And then, of course, a big thank you to my amazing Patreon supporters. Michael Harrison, at you as the stars, Mentally Defective, Cameron James, John Koblenz, Jason R. Long, Wesley Donaldson, Isaac Dennison, Mika Suzuki, iFantasyRace.com, TheRacingInsiders.com, Pepe Luscious, Matthew Koulopoulos, Jeremy Conkling, Emilio Garcia, Joey DiMachino, and the rest of these incredible Patreon supporters. I couldn't do this without the amazing support I get from all of you over on Patreon. If you also want to support me and support the show, check out that top link down in the description. I really appreciate it, y'all. Man, I'm used to the summer months in NASCAR kind of being the dry period. Not a lot happens, a lot of predictable winners and everything. Boy, the last few weeks, Kentucky being as great as it was, last week at Pocono being better than anyone expected, and now this race today being pretty entertaining throughout. We've been spoiled this summer. It has me excited for the playoffs. It has me very excited for some of the tracks we got coming up. I'll be at Bristol in a couple weeks. I'll have you guys some details as far as possible meetups and everything there very shortly. But I'm excited for next week, even at Michigan. We'll see what happens. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you enjoyed the race today. See you guys again very soon. I'll have some more episodes up later this week. Bye-bye, everyone.